Assalamu alaikum, good morning everybody. If any of you are behind stalls or in the souk, please come forward here to the front so we could start today's first of amazing many sessions. My name's Tasneem, I'm your MC for today, and this is day 2 of Mockafest, which, as we promised yesterday, will be filled with discussions, film, soundscape performances, masterclasses, workshops, sharing circles, and ultimately culminating tonight in a soundscape concert with 9 of our Mockafest artists, 9, performing at the plenary hall on the main stage. That'll be on this evening between 8:30 and 10:30, so don't miss that. I'll be plugging it as the day goes by. I'll let you all gather your seats. Just a reminder to you that the Mockafest identity competition, where we're encouraging you to take photos, hashtag and share them along with the hashtag Mockafest 2015, Mockafest identity, and you can follow at Hatik M. The details will be looped throughout the day on the screen behind me. The closing time for that competition is 6 o'clock, and the winner of that will be announced today during the Soundscape concert. The winner, of course, will be presented with a piece of artwork by Teekster, the UK urban artist who is also here at Mockafest. So it's just art left, right and centre. Everywhere you see it, we're talking it, we're touching it, we're giving it away. Today's opening session will be a panel discussion. It's going to be, how do we measure a creative arts economy? And that's a very broad term. It can be including all kinds of different perspectives and possibilities. And the people we have to speak at that, who I'm going to call up on stage, are Alia Khan, Zalfian Fuzi, Ruh Al-Alam, Scott Liddle, and myself as a moderator. So I'll sit there and you can... Good. So these 4 guests are all absolute legends in their field, respectively. I'm going to let each of them give an introduction about themselves before I sit down and join them in a conversation that hopefully will be quite engaging and exploring creative arts as an economy. Is that even a thing? And if it is, what does it look like? How beneficial is it, if at all? Or how do we make it more exciting? So, Alia, first of all, an introduction from yourself.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Good morning. My name is Alia Khan. I'm the founder and chairwoman of the Islamic Fashion and Design Council. We're headquartered in New York, and I live in Dubai, so there's a lot going on over there as well. And we've just set up IFDC Italy and Indonesia, and working on Malaysia now. So we'll talk more about that.
Thank you. Fauzi.
Good morning, my name is Zalfian Fuzi. I'm the Artistic Director and CEO of Theatre Management Associates based here in KL, Malaysia. My work on looking at arts infrastructure is one of my big passions and goals in terms of looking at what we can do to build arts infrastructure here in this city and putting KL on the cultural map. I look into education and training as well, and looking into co-productions with Malaysians and overseas companies.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name is Ruh Al-Alam. I'm from London, the UK. I'm a calligraphy artist. I also run a creative consultancy in London, specializing in Arabic-related work in the Middle East. And I also do a lot of mentoring and teaching in relation to creative art development and artists.
Morning, my name is Scott Liddle, and I'm the country director of the Turquoise Mountain Foundation in Afghanistan, based in Kabul. Turquoise Mountain Foundation is a not-for-profit organization working for the preservation of cultural heritage in Afghanistan and elsewhere, the transmission of traditional artisan skills, and our third aim is to spur economic development through the creative industries in Afghanistan.
Thank you, Scott. And if I might start with you, actually, I believe you have a little clip that you wanted to show us. Is that relating to Turquoise Mountain? And the work
yes, it is, yeah. A short video which might set the scene for some of our discussions.
That would be great.
Seamless transition.
My name is Istorai Istanizang. I am in the second class of jewelry at Turquoise Mountain. Me and Saida are very best friends here. Unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know how to say, Saida is deaf. I think it's fortunately, because when you're not hearing something, then you will focus 100% on your work. So Saida and she's so kind and really helped me in my works. She's so talented. I really like to make chain. Always when I'm designing, I'm always designing a chain. I born in an artistic family, and they always told me that choose the artistic things. From childhood up to now, my father really wanted their daughter join the art. We need to put colors on traditional things. It is the ring for men, and it is my own design. I took the design from Turkmen books. We have problems, especially girls have problems here. But I can live. I have to continue my study, and I have to do the things that I want. And I have to be strong.
Thank you, Scott. That certainly does put it in context. And clearly, art is more than the end object. It's the process of getting to it. And in this case, it's the jewellery and the story behind the women that are producing it. I presume it's mainly women. Can you tell us a bit about why you believe, then, that creative arts in this regard is a valued economy in Afghanistan?
Right, yeah. So in Afghanistan, where we're working, obviously this is one perspective on our discussion, because it's a context of development work and post-conflict reconstruction. But one of the questions we're always interested in at Turquoise Mountain is, why is it better, for example, or is it better to create jobs and livelihoods through, say, the creative industries by encouraging jewelers or calligraphers or ceramicists to work in those crafts and produce those sorts of products for export? Is that better than, say, creating jobs by training lots of mechanics or lots of software developers? What is intrinsically better? We feel that there are other added benefits. Yes, in a context like Afghanistan, the key is to provide livelihoods and create jobs, create opportunities within the country. But at the same time, we feel that there are certain, perhaps more intangible elements to creating jobs for jewelers or woodworkers, for example, because they are engaged with the heritage of their country. It might be linked somehow to questions of identity. It might be linked to the self-esteem of the person, notions of pride. All these other less tangible aspects is what we're trying to support through our work.
It's almost like the hidden economy that you don't see, but it keeps the engine riding. Yes.
Right, exactly.
Ruh, can I ask you, you're based in the UK, but you do engage with projects that take you across the world. Why do you think, or how do you feature, or how do you view your creative art genre, which is calligraphy or design? How do you look at that as being helpful to either global economies or even your personal economy?
I think in a lot of ways, what I do in particular is try and bring a commercial aspect to some of the artwork, particularly when, as a calligrapher, I can then apply a lot of that in a commercial setting, in a scenario, through whether it's branding or sort of marketing design and so on. But what I found through my experience is the way, young budding artists have faced different challenges along the way of how they could actually understand, where their work can take them, both monetarily, but also culturally how it's perceived. And that's another big topic. Maybe I'm opening a new one, but the idea that where you have different societies, different cultures, their perception of what art is and how artistic careers, if they're going to be in any way profitable, whether they're going to be successful for them, whereas a young Indian, artist has to decide if they want to be a doctor, in a stereotypical way, or if they can actually pursue the arts,
There's nothing wrong with being a doctor, really.
Absolutely, no. But there are certain cultural attitudes. I've only talked about South Asian, particular South Asian communities, but in certain countries, you can understand that the industries are not as developed, and so there is a fear that can I be a true artist? Can I actually go out there and actually make money out of doing this, or should I just be safe and be a doctor?
Okay, well, I think I'm just going to skip to Alia for just a second. How do you sell that, Alia? How do you sell art is useful? How do you sell it has a value to a community or to a mainstream that really does poo-poo the arts and think it's all arty-farty?
Well, I think it sells itself. I think if there's something worth any of the merit of the talent in it, then it sells itself. What the real question is, how do we bring that to the forefront? How do we bring that to the audience and to the eyes of those that appreciate, and even those that don't realize that they have an inclination towards the arts? Something awakens in them when it's brought to them. So I think more forums like this, more platforms like Mocha Fest, where we have a chance to build that exposure, but we have a lot of work to do. We've got a long way to go.
Okay. And Zalfian, we had a small discussion earlier, and we compared, economies that value culture and those that don't, even at a country level. Do you want to just share with me what your views are on that?
Sure. I think it's always very difficult working in an environment where, arts appreciation, as Ali was talking about, is probably very limited. And I think it comes back to building audiences and building audiences to appreciate art. And a lot of that has to do with education. So if you are taught about art in schools, in elementary school to middle school to high school, that's really, really key in developing a core audience that'll come to your shows or come to your theaters or your musicals or appreciate visual art, for instance. In Malaysia, for instance, one of the things that we face is, of course, talking to sponsors or talking to corporations, where sometimes you're talking to them and they don't see yet the connection between why they should invest in the arts. And I think that's a key component of one of the big issues that we have here. Is like, why should we invest in arts, and what is the value to me? And I think that's always a very important discussion and dialogue between the artists to be able to explain how valuable it would be for a corporation or a government agency or an NGO or other corporate body to invest in the arts.
Okay. Welcome those of you who just arrived. We have a lot of empty seats here in the front. If you want to take a seat, we've just started. Feel free to have a seat at the front, that's fine. We're discussing how do we measure a creative arts economy, and what is the value of that? How does it strengthen us? What are its weaknesses? And how can we improve them? Scott, with your Turquoise Mountain organisation, obviously you're here in Malaysia, and I'm wondering if you travel a lot to promote the work of the Turquoise Mountain Foundation, and if that is the case, what does that say about having to leave where you are in order to attract investment to keep yourself going?
Yes, we do both people who sort of international employees of Turquoise Mountain who live in Kabul, like I do. We travel to take part in these kinds of events, to be part of the conversation on culture as a driver for economic and social development. Yesterday we were talking about social enterprise, which is also another important facet of how we're trying to work. At the same time, for example, here the idea was I was going to come with one of our Afghan artisan colleagues. The visa didn't come through in time, sadly, but we're often, the big part of the project as well is to give that exposure to the Afghan artisans. So Starai, who's in the jewelry film there, is currently in the US doing a speaker tour. One of our calligraphers is currently in the UK doing some exhibitions. So it's really to create those links between the Afghan artisans and the international audience, whoever that may be. It might be customers, it might be exhibitions, it could be, those are the links we want to create. But it's definitely true that because the particularities of Afghanistan and perhaps other countries in similar situations, it's hard to get people to come to Afghanistan. We do get visitors, but not necessarily a huge number. So, you know, we need to go out of Afghanistan to take the story out and you know, create films and the moving, you know, stories that go behind the products that are produced.
Yeah, I guess with the Afghanistan example, it is, I guess it's a geopolitical issue there too, so that could probably be one of the reasons you need to export out yourselves and your ideas. Ruh, with your work, the idea of, in some people's eyes with artists, that they should be doing their work for free because it's actually a community service and it's extremely valuable. Obviously that takes away from the capacity and the, you know, I guess the agency of an artist themselves in being able to promote themselves. And I think that goes to some extent to a culture which downplays the value of arts. How do you respond to people that say, you know, that free sabilillah mentality that we have?
Yeah, so that's another play on words. I mean, you have free sabilillah. There's a concept that goes across many industries, not necessarily just the arts, also sort of creative industries. I think there is, in some parts of society, at some levels, there is a lack of appreciation of the effort that goes into a lot of creative processes. You know, you've got artists that would spend years learning a craft. You know, a typical calligrapher will take up to about 4 years to learn a particular script, you know, abroad, spending money, living with their teacher. You know, it's a long process. And so then, you know, you can't simply expect them to actually simply just produce it overnight. I mean, they probably can, but that's 4 years plus overnight, you know, that one night, you know, that they can produce. So it's a lot of experience that goes into it. And I think there needs to be a cultural education in many different places, and a sort of an education that teaches people that arts and the creative industries are as important as anything else, because they are an expression, they're a reflection of our societies. And it's important that the only way we can really support artists is to actually appreciate what they've done and actually pay what they're worth, really. And artists will always do things for free, and they do. In fact, a lot of artists, you know, that have actually come here and participate in previous shows and exhibitions that I've been to, they paid their way. You know, they paid thousands of pounds to travel around the world with their artwork and display it for nothing. They wouldn't even sell a piece of artwork, you know, on occasion.
It's almost like a catch-22 though, because when you have artists who believe in their art and believe in the well-being that their art emanates, they will make that effort to share it. Absolutely. And then potential business investors will think, well, you know, they're paying their way, so I don't really need to fund them now, do I? How do you reconcile that?
Well, I mean, look, a lot of people in other businesses, they do similar things. I think the reality is that it comes down to how businesses can really potentially see the artists, designers, and so on as assets, as valuable assets, you know, and it's most prominent in certain industries, such as advertising and branding and so on, because that plays a direct role in what you put out. So, you know, people can appreciate Apple branding and Apple product design, because these have been made by design or done by designers. And almost everything that you see in this room has been designed by a designer, you know, possibly trained as an artist in a fine art college of some kind. You know, everything from the signage, you know, not just the art that's been displayed, you know, the T-shirts and, you know, the products there, they've all been designed by artists and designers. In fact, it surrounds us, the architecture and so on. And so if we don't realize that, if we don't open our eyes to that, then we're really sort of neglecting a major part of our society and our culture.
Yeah. Alia, just to switch to you again, just in response to what Ruh has said, what's been your experience?
Yeah, I was going to say, there's two sides to that, because typically artists also lack this business acumen. And I think that becomes challenging for the world to sort of do business with the artists as well. So I think we have a responsibility. Do you agree with that?
I totally agree, and this is one of the things that MoCAFest is facilitating to some extent. You know, that learning of business acumen and actually gaining some knowledge in trying to make a business aspect to some of your work.
Yeah, because as an artist, in our council we realize the artists and designers lack a discipline, which makes it hard for the world to work with them. And so we come up with training programs. I don't know if you agree, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the whole MoCA Fellows for the past 5 days, was instrumental in explaining that, giving them business principles, understanding how they would monetize, what their income revenue streams are, and kind of, making them not be so allergic to Excel sheets.
Yeah, because companies like Apple and companies that have designed whatever you see in this room as well are the companies that set up. They had that business sense, and then they also had the good sense to hire good talent. So it goes hand in hand. So, and we recognize that in our council, so we really try not to alienate either side, and we try to create a complementary relationship between the two. And I think that's very important for you as the artist, most of us are artists perhaps in this room, to reach out in that way. And there's a level of proving yourself. There's one thing to show extreme talent, which we see, and there's no doubt that that needs to be appreciated. But then there's also this level of professionalism and discipline and eagerness. Sometimes artists can come across like a care-not type of with a care-not type of an attitude, and you kind of have to show that you're willing to sell yourself as well. So there is that game that goes on in between the two parties.
That's a good point. And I think when you speak to artists as emerging artists, it's really useful knowledge to have. In terms of your IFDC, that really went from being a concept and an idea to now a big player in, I guess, both the corporate scene and as a company to reckon with, because you've taken yourselves from being like literally in an office in Dubai to having locations across the world and a vision. Can you just talk us through how that came to be? Because that's a classic example of having an idea about creative art, be it modest fashion, and seeing that flourish to the extent that you're now an economic mover.
I think what happened there was the concept was very simple. It was, we need a platform, we need a council as such, that would build a platform to create initiatives and opportunities for the industry players, including the designers and the artists. And I think we just recognized that there is definitely immense talent, and there's definitely immense business. So, don't fool yourself for a second and think that the business isn't out there, because it really is, and the demand is huge. Even if you're just talking about fashion alone, if you read any of the reports, whether you see that it's a $96 billion market or a $500 billion market, the spending power is huge. So there is business for you guys. So even if you're an artist and not in fashion, you could be putting your great designs on textiles, on bags, on accessories, and there's a big demand for that. So what we were seeing was that there was this fragmented sort of disposition of the industries in both sides, the arts and in fashion. And we saw an opportunity. We saw an opportunity for the industry players, and we said, this can be done. And I think it was just recognizing that it is possible, and to be able to say yes to yourself, that this is going to happen, and we're going to create opportunities. And alhamdulillah, today we've got a lot of retailers around the world that are talking to us about placing designers and artists' work into their shops, not on consignment, on purchase deals. So that's like a huge win. And we're working with a lot of initiatives like Global Fashion Weeks, where IFDC is partnering, and it's historical in some senses, I suppose, because it's the first time that Islamic fashion and modest fashion is being taken seriously by the fashion weeks. So we've been signing MOUs with New York Fashion Week, Los Angeles Fashion Week, Jakarta Fashion Week, we just finished a couple of days ago. We're now talking to Mercedes-Benz Malaysia Fashion Week. So there's tremendous opportunity, and I think IFDC, hopefully, inshallah, represents a coming together. Because really, united, no one can bring you down. There's only one way, and that's up, and that's what we hope to prove.
Thank you, Alia. Zalfian, united we're stronger. How do we merge the varying emerging artists who are caught in the disparate fields of film or photography or music or calligraphy? How do we bring them together or do we need to bring them together in order to actually then enhance their individual capacity, or should we be supporting individual genres?
I think it's a combination of both. I don't think you can do either or. I think it works as a two-pronged approach. I mean, artists will always do whatever it is that they're passionate about on their own, with or without anybody's help. If they believe in their work, they will definitely go and push themselves and do whatever it is that they want. Of course, putting them together as a collective or as an organization or in some sort of arts council or grouping, of course, is very beneficial to represent a collective voice. And depending on who you're talking to, if you're talking to a government ministry or an agency and you're represented by a large group of artists, of course that means you have a very strong voice and you can demand and make requests. In other countries you have arts councils. Some countries you
Well,
don't.
I was going to ask, I mean, which countries are doing it better when it comes to the governments being proactive in supporting arts, as opposed to the community having to rally and lobby and literally beg for money for their artistic programs?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I hate to use the word beg because we really shouldn't be begging. I think the way artists communicate to different bodies should be that they should be investing, that governments or agencies or corporations should be investing in the arts, and there's a clear difference. I think we need to stop playing the victim, of playing, please help support me, I'm this lonely artist, and you should believe in me because my work is good, so there. So like, give me money. I think that approach has long been gone. I think we have to stop doing that, in fact. And I think if you have value, you have to represent that value, and you have to communicate that value to a company and saying, look, by investing in me, this is what I can bring as a return on investment.
Have you seen that happen?
I've seen it happen, especially in terms of my work, dealing with developers. Developers, for instance, now in Malaysia, whether they're building shopping malls or mixed retail development sites, are investing more and more into art spaces. And it's kind of become a trend now to have, art galleries or little open spaces for gallery spaces, or white box, black box, like Publica, for instance. And you can see that now more and more developers are doing that because they know that if they invest in the arts, the value and appreciation of the property around it increases. A place like Publica, for instance, I was talking to the manager the other day, where I brought the Wonka Fellows there, and she said that by investing in the art spaces there and having art retail there as a concept and as a brand, branding the mall, the property in that area has gone up by 10%. So the appreciation is great for a developer.
That's a great selling pitch. And Ruh and Scott, between the two of you, I mean, government investment versus philanthropic investment for the arts. Have you experienced both, and has there been a difference?
Well, I've seen that in certain situations there have been significant improvements. I mean, I just wanted to make a point about what Zalfian was saying. In the UK, we've seen the government actually give tax cuts, to certain industries. Particularly, for example, a good example is the video game industry, so that the industry in the UK could then lift itself up to be in competition internationally with other industries. Situations like that really boost creative industries in general, and we've seen that in many other scenarios, and I think it significantly helps. Actually, in many ways, it's linked to certain things like tourism. Yes. Where Liverpool as a city, tons of galleries right now, and it's a cultural capital in the UK now, and it helps the tourism and improves many different aspects of society. And it's probably why also in the Gulf you see huge numbers of galleries and museums popping up, and it's a future investment for those countries. When the oil runs out. Sorry, but coming back to your point, I'll let Scott answer that, and then I'll take over.
Well, again,
Philanthropic versus government. I mean, when you're getting funded, is there a difference in the outcome of the art that you have to produce, or is it the same thing?
Yeah, I'd say, well, in the Afghan context, unfortunately, there's no support really from the Afghan government for the arts yet, because sort of budgetary constraints. So the Afghan Ministry of Culture probably has the smallest budget of all the ministries in Afghanistan. But obviously, there's a lot of donor money in Afghanistan, and we as a foundation rely to a large extent currently on donations or on grant money from both private individuals and governments. But actually, the difference is that with the artisans that we support, we're not making grants to them. We're providing all sorts of other supports, such as workshop space, access to expensive machinery, access to raw materials, helping them access capital, access markets, and so on. But we don't actually give out any grants or money to artists, which we believe is a much better way to do it. And similarly with the inward investment to Afghanistan from donors, the interesting question, I suppose, well, for us and potentially for the arts more generally is, what kind of return should one be expecting on those investments? Should it be just purely philanthropic in the sense of, okay, it's a grant, it's a donation, I don't expect you to pay it back? Or are we looking for some blend of financial and social returns of some sort, or we might call it financial and creative or artistic returns? And this, I suppose, comes to the heart of the question of this panel, which is the measurement. So do we measure only in terms of the financial aspects, which is how we tend to measure an economy, or are there other aspects that are important? And I guess most of us believe that there are other important aspects, but the question is how to measure them and how to demonstrate them so that we can make a pitch to investors that says, yes, there's a part of this which will give you a financial return, but there's also another very important part, which is a non-financial return, but I can demonstrate it to you.
Yes. And I mean, just to use Afghanistan as an example, if you're talking about handicrafts and traditional arts and crafts as a form of promoting economies, yes, there's a return that's monetary, but clearly with the women that we've seen, the self-esteem and the well-being of these women, you can't put a price on that. But sometimes you need to put a measurement on that to your funding bodies. How do you do that? How do you measure the aesthetics? Ruh, Alia, Zalfian?
I think in many ways what you'll find is in society, as people get to initiate in the arts, so maybe with this young lady, she's significantly changed perceptions. And so within her community, people are starting to respect, what she's doing. I mean, there's one artist here, Hamza Fasiki. Now he's from Morocco, and I love the fact that he is beginning to revive a craft that his father taught him. And he was saying that he's received occasional backlash from people in the sense that they're looking down at the work and saying, well, actually, it's not really, particularly potentially financially viable for you to do this, but he's carrying it, persevering. And then he's had a lot more positive reaction overall because people are starting to appreciate, again, their own cultural heritage. And so you have a natural rise in appreciation for identity, their own identity, and actually building of identity. And maybe in Afghanistan, after the turmoil of the last, 10 years or more, it might be a chance for people to really reconnect back to who they are, what they're made of in terms of their culture, their heritage, and their arts. And the arts does this the most. And again, it's hard to measure that, but I think you can probably see in some aspects where people are actually going back to producing a lot of this, these crafts and arts, opening shops again, that sell these sort of products, and maybe you might see a rise in tourism again, so you can probably eventually measure it, but and I think it does benefit society overall.
Zalfian, do you?
Definitely. There are definitely. Definitely, there are a lot of intangible aspects and spin-off effects of investing in the arts. I think some of these things are hard to measure. I mean, for theater, for example, playwrights are often regarded as being on the cutting edge of social commentary, talking about who we are as people, what's going on in the area that you live, or what's going on in the world. I think the maturing of being able to find your voice as an artist. So the more you engage with the people around you, you engage with your society, you engage with your country or your city or the world, people are finding a way to express themselves. And that expression is really important to find out, or use the function of art as a reflection of who we are as a society. So I think these intangible aspects are hard to measure, but I think you can see them. I mean, without art, it's very hard to have a soul in your city.
Yes, that's the soul of the city. That's right, Alia.
Agreed. I think I'm a big believer in this spiritual, metaphysical value. I think everything has an energetic value. I genuinely do. I think when you lie your way through business or through anything or a relationship or in life, I think there's a value that you lose, and it's a loss that is measurable, but you kind of have to believe in it first to really understand that loss. In the same way, when you do something good and honest and true, as many artists do, and then you have that added value of helping someone's life improve, there is a metaphysical value to that gets directly applied to your business. And I can tell you that I've seen many examples. IFDC lives by these principles, and we really believe in giving back, paying back, and we see how that just sort of goes around in beautiful circles. So whether we want to call it immeasurable or whether we want to call it a value that just is there and it sustains itself, you first have to believe in it before you can even decide about how to measure it.
Thank you. I'm probably going to shoot one more question to the panel before I open it up to the floor. I just wanted to ask very loosely, the traditional arts versus contemporary art. Obviously, they have different markets, different audiences, and probably different forms of investment and support from governments, depending where there are. Scott, with Afghanistan, I'm guessing it's mainly the traditional arts that you're dealing with when it comes to promoting that as a form of economy for Afghanistan. Now, is that the interest that you're getting from abroad, is that mainly from Western countries when you talk about philanthropists and investors?
As Turquoise Mountain, we work primarily in the traditional arts. Obviously, traditional is sometimes a problematic term in itself. We've also worked, Turquoise Mountain ran for many years in Afghanistan the annual Contemporary Art Prize. So we try and foster creativity of any sort and try not to draw too much of an artificial boundary between the traditional and the contemporary. And in fact, in a lot of the products that our artisans are producing, the idea very much is often to marry traditional techniques with elements of contemporary design.
Okay.
In terms of investment, we have supporters both in Europe and the US, but also quite large support from the Gulf. So we try and have a pretty diverse support base. And similarly, in terms of where we're marketing these Afghan products, we are selling them in London and New York, but we're also selling them in the Gulf. Our artisans in Afghanistan recently produced interior decorative elements for a 5-star hotel in Mecca. So we're really trying to, anyone who wants to buy beautiful Afghan artisan products is welcome to buy them, whether they're in the Gulf or in Europe or elsewhere.
Okay, so you've got basically both. I'm talking about the global north, the global south. They're both expressing an interest in your art. And I guess I was getting to, are the traditional arts more sellable across the West than, say, the more modern contemporary arts? I'm just wondering, for example, we talked about Hamza's work, and I mean, it is quite spectacular, and the amount of effort that goes into it, very traditional. If that's not being as valued, maybe in Morocco per se, but yet outside of it, we have a greater appreciation. Is that a reflection of market trends, or is that just? Yeah, well, I guess I'm trying to work out what is the driver behind that. Ruh, do you have it?
I think there's a lot of different aspects. There's history, there's globalization, there's colonialization. There's a lot of history that goes into a lot of these countries and facets that make up societies and what they go through. In 1930s Egypt, you could mistake it for Paris, in 1930s, because it looked very similar. Both the architecture, the arts, the fine art galleries are full of very contemporary Western-looking art, and almost nothing related to local Egyptian or Arab-related culture. It's a produce of what the society is going through. And that transition, along the way, some people even lose language along the way, that to the point that they have to really relearn or be retaught their own original language because they've just adopted so many other things. And so it comes to a point where people have gone through these long processes in history, wars and turmoil and so on. Arts just falls to the side. It's a luxury, and it's in many societies it is a luxury. And I think this is where artists have to make sure that they don't get caught up in being an elitist sort of, producers of elitist artwork, only for the rich, only for those higher up in society, but actually, easy, accessible to all. And I think there's a slow return and a definitive one in many societies, many countries that I've seen anyway, or people realizing that actually what they've got in their own country, the crafts, the skills, is something that to be really appreciative of.
A renaissance of sorts.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Zalfian, what about yourself? How do you see that?
So, I think I just want to touch on that about that. Just a very important point about the role of the arts, if I may. I just want to say one of the people that I met a couple of years back was a man named Anthony Field, and he was the founder of the Arts Council of England. And I asked him, I said, and he was in his 80s at the time, and he said, I asked him, I said, why was the Arts Council of England created? And he said, well, it was created after World War II to rebuild society. And he used art, or that was the whole intention of creating the Arts Council, was to use art to rebuild society after the country had been devastated.
Well, that's quite visionary. And yet now we look at that and we think, oh,
Yeah.
you know,
Exactly.
it's backward. And yet it's not. It's probably the most progressive statement of some time.
Yeah, exactly. I think for art now, I think for me, I see art as a way of storytelling. So whatever art form that you have, whether you're a visual artist or you're a dancer or a musician or doing handicrafts, it's a way of telling your story. I think between traditional and contemporary, I think now with new media and living in the 21st century in 2015, the ways of telling stories are evolving and changing. So while you have traditional art forms that still exist, and that maybe in certain countries they're dying out or they're becoming like a heritage sort of viewpoint, the way of telling stories, a lot of it's going now online. So I think how people are consuming art is also changing. So they may not be going to the theater and watching dance or music, but the young people can tell you who the latest dancer is on the X Factor or the latest singer on American Idol. I think it's a way of how we distribute the content.
Yeah.
And I think not just looking at art forms as just live performance or face-to-face, but how people are interacting with that content that's being created by artists now in the 21st century. So how do we distribute content, and how do we get them engaged, and how do we build the audiences through new ways which never ever existed before? So you can revive a traditional art form by engaging with them digitally.
Yes.
Or like Hamza, for instance, his project last week, he does his traditional art form of copper etching. And his whole project, Hamza, which is over there now waving at me, his whole project is about developing an app to put on mobile devices. You just download it from the App Store.
That's a
so
fusion
that
of
he can-
traditional and modern in
so
a
that
very,
he
very
can-
handful.
So he can
simple
build
way.
audiences and
Right.
teach people about that art form.
Yeah.
So I think it is now, you got to bring it to the 21st century and see how the trends are changing and how you can engage with the audience today.
That's a useful segue into what I was going to ask Alia. Technology, the way that we use our phones with bloggers, for example, fashion bloggers. We now know that, Instagram, social media, and Facebook and whatnot. We have so many young, emerging, budding fashionistas, designers, both in the modest fashion world and globally. Do you think this has been instrumental in the drive of modest fashion?
Yes, definitely. Look, before this, what was it? It was a celebrity-driven culture, right? We were following celebrities pretty much. We were seeing what was on the red carpet and what people were wearing, and we thought that was appealing, so we tried to emulate that. And I think gone are those days. You're looking at a movement now which is all about individuality. And it's all about expressing yourself, and that's why everybody thinks that they can have their own blog, because they all feel that they're special and they're unique in their own way, and they are. So what that's developing is a different culture altogether. And gone is the spiel or the lingo of what's in and what's out, what's this season, what's last season. I think that was a very 80s and 90s thing. People used to sort of follow trends, if you will. Now it's all about individual character and personalities and what appeals to you, and that goes back to your question about the art. Is it okay to still continue to do traditional art? Do people appreciate it? I think it really boils down to their own personal taste. And I can tell you that you cannot convince someone to buy art that doesn't appeal to them. So some people find traditional art very appealing, and I've seen homes where it's flooded with the most beautiful traditional art and not very much contemporary art, and that just speaks to their own personal taste. And it kind of flows into clothing too. It's the same set of rules for clothing. I can't convince you on how to dress, but as a council, it's my job to bring that selection and to bring that array of, the most amazing possibilities within the realm of modest parameters to you. And the rest is up to you to choose what speaks to you the best and what represents you in the best way.
And I guess whether it's traditional or whether it's cutting edge modern, there's a market for both.
Absolutely.
Okay. Do we have any questions from the audience that you want to throw to any of our panelists before we close? Look, I just wanted to point out, Scott, you have a table in the foyer with various items or handicrafts from the Turquoise Mountain jewellery items. Is that correct?
Yeah, mainly jewellery and also some woodwork, all handmade in Afghanistan.
Right, so I'd encourage you to actually see that handicraft. It's quite exceptional and all handmade. Handmade,
all handmade,
all
and
handmade.
all the raw materials are also from Afghanistan, so the semi-precious gemstones, walnut wood, etc.
Yeah, no, actually, we do have a series of stalls across the foyer of a lot of handmade items per se. Again, promoting the style of so many local artists and obviously imported artists that we have here at Mockafest. There's some incredible attention to detail, and I think, Zalfian mentioned, art is storytelling. And behind each of those pieces of art and craft, there is a lot of intellectual capital, creative capital, background story, and I think every object is more than just what you hold in your hand, it's what's come before it. So that's very important to mention. Are there any other questions or any questions at all from our audience? No? Absolutely dumbstruck by your answers, that's fantastic. Look, I'm just going to end with a very quick question, which is kind of off topic a little bit, but I thought it'd be interesting to ask. Scott, yourself, you have this foundation, and I did wonder, if you weren't in the field of entrepreneurship and having this business, what kind of art practice would you see yourself in if you had another option?
Myself, I come from a background in humanitarian work, so it's more sort of fortuitous coming together of humanitarian objectives with the creative industries in Afghanistan. That means that I've got the chance to work with lots of talented Afghan artists. Myself, I'm extremely untalented when it comes to art.
Well, we need someone to coordinate, so thank you. And Ruh, if money and economy were no object at all, what art form would you pursue to your nth degree?
I don't know, interpretive dance? I don't know.
Interpretive dance? Well, you've got the look going on, so...
No, I think Sufyan mentioned earlier, nothing's going to stop an artist doing, his or her work, and nothing ever should. And you don't need to be told by somebody or motivated by somebody else. Yes, some artists are moody in the sense that they work at certain times of the day or certain types of motivation is needed, but reality is they're driven, and they're driven to produce stuff. And so I know I jump from one type of project to another, whether it's building something by hand, filming something or doing photography or whatever. I'll always be doing something. I did it since I was a kid, and I know many artists here would be doing the same thing. Whether I made money out of it or not, I know I'd be producing stuff.
You'd be producing stuff. Zalfian, yourself?
I think for me, I think increasingly as I get older, I'm more and more interested in architecture. Actually, also because of my work dealing with a lot of developers and looking at arts infrastructure, seeing how you actually create the building blocks of arts infrastructure in communities, in developments, and how do you mix that in together with retail and shopping and hotels and housing and things like that. I think that's really, really fascinating, and how it can actually be a hub or incubator for the creative industries and affect the societies that live in that area.
It's interesting, all three of your answers so far all link back to well-being as well. Alia, what's your hidden creative artist say?
I don't know about any hidden creative artist in me at all, actually. I think I'd be a sculptor of minds. I think I just if I weren't doing this, I love teaching, and I love our training programs. I love partaking in developing training programs and mentoring. So that would probably be my natural next fit.
Well, clearly this panel they're all career creatives. I'd like you to thank Scott, Ruh, Zalfian, and Alia. Please make them a big thank you. Thank you. And just a reminder to you that the stall that Scott has of Turquoise Mountain produce is out in the foyer, and I'd encourage you to have a look at that. We start our next session in 5 to 10 minutes, so please do come back for that. Thank you.